Hey, beautiful. And good morning, everyone. Good to see.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Good to see you. Thank you. Ah, Professor Bellinger, how are you doing? Yeah. I've emailed you and you have not returned my emails.
I didn't see your email.
Okay,
I'll look
well,
for it again.
I will email again. Uh, Paula, Dorothy, Julia Royal back from. Are you back in the States, Julia? Oh, okay. I would say. And Sandra, Deborah, wow, so many people. Uh, Good to see everyone this morning. We're going to get started in a just a moment. We'll give uh, people a chance just to join us, and as we can as we start. I hope everyone is staying warm during this
Hi.
cold weather. Anyway, okay, here we are. Okay, we Ken Reeves. I'm going to email you. Could we uh, connect when you have a moment? Good to see you. Okay, I'm going to email you about February. Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, we should get started. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Dennis Lloyd, and along with my daughters and the help of many, many friends, we have established and formed the Slave Legacy History Coalition, which is a platform which provides information on American history. And so, before we introduce our speaker of the day, uh, and I am going to turn our meeting over to Naomi Gordon. And Naomi will just give us an update on uh, any announcements she may have. Naomi?
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. So for our announcements today, first, I want to extend our condolences to the family of Gloria Fox, who was a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives for the 7th Suffolk District. She passed this November and has definitely left a lasting impact and legacy. Uh, Also, some of you may know Dr. Alexandria Russell, who spoke for us 2 years ago, has recently published a book titled Black Women Legacies, Public History Sites, Seen and Unseen, which explores the memorialization of African American women and its distinctive impact on physical and cultural landscapes throughout the United States. The full book description is available on her website, which I'll share in a moment. I also want to take a moment to reflect on 2024, which was definitely an interesting year, and we were able to accomplish so much. And I want to sincerely thank everyone for your support. And as we look to 2025, it'll be the semi-quintennial for the United States, or America 250. And we are just coming off of a presidential election, so it will be both an interesting and important year to be doing public history, and we hope you'll be joining us for that journey. And as you may have seen, we are in the midst of our year-end fundraising. Thank you to those who have already donated. Your support is always appreciated. And if you haven't had the chance to make a gift and you would like to, I will be dropping a link for that below. I'll also mention that our first speaker for the new year will be Sarah Pleisch, Vice Provost for Special Projects at Harvard. She spoke for us, I think, exactly a year ago. So she'll be providing some updates on the Harvard and Legacy of Slavery initiative. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dennis to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for the wonderful, assistance and job you do in keeping everything moving. Believe me, it wasn't for Naomi. Uh, it's good to see everyone again this morning, and I am very pleased this morning to introduce someone who has been a friend and who has been fourth year of the Slave Legacy History Coalition monthly meetings. And our speaker today has been there, I believe, just about at every meeting, and possibly has had something to offer in terms of a perspective of that meeting at each time she's been present. So we're very pleased today to introduce our speaker from Botswana to Boston. If you've had a chance to read her biography, uh, uh, our speaker, Professor Barbara Brown, has been a educator, not only here in the States and certainly in Massachusetts, but also in hometown, and she will share that information on her presentation today. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this morning, Barbara Brown, Professor Barbara Brown.
Thank you, Dennis. Are we all set, Naomi? I want to start by saying that Dennis and I just discovered that we have a mutual friend from something like 40 years ago,
Right.
Chris and Tetta.
Mm-hmm.
So the connections probably within the group are many. The talk will be both about Brookline, but also about Brookline as a relatively typical town in the region, and then what we've learned about public education from our work for the past 18 years. And I'm glad to be here because I've learned so much coming to these. I don't come just because my father tells me to come. I come because I learn. And I learn strategies, I learn information, I learn new perspectives. It's been a great 4 years. Now it's going to be about the strategies of what you do after you've done the research. If we could go to the next slide, please. 18 years ago, the head of the diversity office said to me, Barbara, you really should go look at the plaque at the entrance of town hall. And I said, why, Steve? He said, I'm not going to tell you. So I went and looked at the plaque, and I'm going to show you a portion of the plaque, not the whole plaque, which is what he gave me. Next. And here I'm going to ask you to do what I did 18 years ago. Find something that stands out as different. And by the way, if you see ESQ, that simply means squire. They were names given to people who were close to the government, the colonial government. And if you find something that's unusual, if you could put what you find in the chat. Esquire Boylston's Prince and Esquire Gardner's Adam. Three enslaved men, not only because they have the apostrophe S, but also because they're at the bottom of the list and because they have no surnames. So they're not really full adult humans. Now we know one thing special about Esquire Boylston's Prince, and it's not about Esquire Boylston, it's about Prince. Next. Naomi, next, please. Thank you. In 1779, Prince, having fought at the Battle of Lexington, decided that he too wanted his freedom because the war was not about freedom, the war was about independence. And we often mix the two words up in this country. He was never found again. It's believed he went to Salem because if he had gone to Boston, he might have been recognized. And Salem was a safer port to go, and to go offshore meant no one could find him. And the ships were always looking for more labor. Next, please. I like to remind people how long slavery has existed in our country. I learned this from Byron Rushing, that it's not until 2111 that we will have more years of freedom than of slavery. And this is a powerful, troubling reminder of how long slavery has been with us and how long the shadow of slavery continues to be with us. I want my audience always to know the larger story, even within the smaller story. Next. I'll start with our ongoing research, which continues. I learned something new just last week in a talk in Boston. Next, please. We've found, if I can put it that in such a somewhat ridiculous way, that there were at least 4 free couples in Brookline and a number of other free African Americans and Indigenous people. It was all in the first half of the 1700s. We have inadequate records for the 1600s because there was not a church here. So Anthony Cordner and Susanna and what bringing their names together is they were adults and they were married in the church. Next, please. Here in Brookline, I made this map using a map of property owners in Brookline. As you can see here, roughly half of the property in Brookline was held by enslavers in 1746. Roughly 1/4 of the homeowners in Brookline were enslavers, and that is the same percentage as in Boston. It's a high percentage, but slavery was common here, and that's something that in our public education programs we across. Now I want to pause here and talk about the visuals I've already shown you. And this is about public education. The first thing I want to do with my audience, online, in person, on a walking tour, is to engage them. So I always start with the slides of town hall, because people don't believe that right in public place, and for the last 120 years, has been this list that lists enslaved people in Brookline. I didn't know either, and I've lived here for a very long time. So we want to engage the audience, and we want to do it with visuals, because visuals are so powerful. So those visuals of town hall, the visual here of the map of Brookline. And I want to include always individual stories, particularly of enslaved people, because there is a tendency in the general public to see them as a mass of people, undifferentiated, with no individual lives, with no agency whatsoever. And that is not the truth. Then I want to, and this is really important, I learned this from Meadow Dibble, I want to startle my audience. I want them to be surprised. I want them to be shocked, to be in this, I didn't know that. Until you startle people, you don't get underneath their notion of what they think they already know, and believe that that is the basis of knowledge about slavery. So I want to startle them with facts. I want to startle them with visuals. I want to startle them all together so that they can open their minds. Because unless they open their minds to new information, the new information will just sit on top of the old information as a bit of a froth, but not as something of substance. And then what I want to do is, besides startling them, is to introduce them to real people. Because it's when you get to people's hearts that you can make the greatest difference. And I learned this from Byron Rushing, who said in an interview in the spring, he said a lot of white people, and this is particularly true of non-Black people, getting to the hearts. A lot of white people will come up to me, Byron said, and say, you know, Byron, it's just so awful what happened a long time ago. Um, and they're saying it with their heads, but they don't feel the depth and the awfulness of it. And so part of what I try to do in public education is to get to people's hearts, because that's where it really rests, hearts and minds together. And I've learned so much from Byron over the years, and he and I have done a little work together on the Perkins School for the Blind. Now, on to the next slide, please. Those enslaved in Brookline, our current knowledge tells us that there were roughly 80 enslaved people starting in 1675, when the first 7 enslaved people were indigenous people captured in Metacom's War. And the colony did not want them to stay in the colony because they weren't safe people for the colonists. So you were encouraged to buy them from the colony and then sell them into the Caribbean. Those who remained here in Brookline, there were twice as many men as women, because the enslavers wanted men as farm labor primarily, and women were less important. Now stop and think about what that means for both the men and the women. Most men want to have a marriage or a long-term relationship with a woman, or as long as possible before they're sold again. And yet there are twice as many of them as there are women. And so the women on their side are feeling hard put upon by the men. There are too many men and too few women. Then you add in that people were scattered in different parts of the town. And so if you want to see someone else, you need to leave your property and walk to somebody else's property in order to visit with people of your own race. That was difficult. And there were very few children, almost half of whom died before they were 11 here in Brookline. We don't know if there were very few children because women did everything they could to prevent a pregnancy, or because the enslavers threatened the women about pregnancy, since children were not useful to the enslavers until they were about age of 11, perhaps 8. But before that, they would distract enslaved women from their work. So this was a very skewed population, and what it meant was a great deal of loneliness. And that's just from the South, the difference between men and women, the lack of family, and the fewness of children. Let's see. But that didn't mean that people, now to the next slide, that didn't people have agency who were enslaved. 1741, Dinah, who together with her daughters was enslaved, they were enslaved to the first minister in Brookline. 1741, Dinah believed that she was on her deathbed. How would she protect her daughters? What could she do to make sure that they weren't violated, or that they might even be treated well? She immediately asked to be baptized, for all 3 of them to be baptized. And so they were together, baptized by the minister. This didn't provide a lot of protection. It provided some, but Dinah had very little that she could do. And so what she did was to get all 3 of them baptized. She did live past that day, and we don't know what happened to any of the 3 people. It's likely, since they aren't in the town's death records, that they were sold either individually or together. No. And I could tell you a few other stories. There were 2 African-American enslaved couples who were able to get married. Marriage was legal in this state. And what marriage did is they had to get the permission of the owners to get married and to get married in the church. And what that meant for the owners is it would be more difficult for them to separate the couple, and to sell them away. And so both of the couples in Brookline had 4 children. 3 of them survived to adulthood. And in one case, he survived until there was freedom, and he and his wife immediately moved to Dorchester. So these are the stories that we don't hear, and these are the stories we need to know. And now I would like to go on to the next slide. Knowledge, of course, is one thing. You don't want to keep it hidden. So we have done almost 100 walking tours for students, for adults, for civic and faith-based organizations, and just 4 times a year for anybody who wants to sign up for our standard walking tour. But we've learned that education isn't enough. And so our first program for the town-wide was the following. Next. And it was our first experience of resistance to acknowledging slavery here. We went to the cemetery trustees, and this was on the wall of the cemetery, this plaque, and we asked to have a plaque there, and they said, no, you're lying. There are no slaves in Brookline. And I wanted to leap across the table, but the director of diversity put his hand gently on my arm and said, we will be back next month with the documentation. And so we returned the next month. And this time they saw the documentation, but their reply was, you're trying to shame us. You're trying to make us feel guilty, which meant that they associated themselves with the enslavers. So none of them were related to the enslavers as far as they knew. We then said we would like to have a plaque, and they said, you can have a plaque inside of the cemetery because that would be wrong. We mentioned other cemeteries with enslaved people in Boston. They said that doesn't matter. This is Brookline. And we said, all right, we'll have it outside the cemetery. Turns out they did us a great favor because no one goes into that little old colonial cemetery except for teenagers with beer and people walking their dogs. Putting it on the outside at an intersection with a school was a brilliant place to have it. But the cemetery trustees went one step further. They said, you cannot write on the wall of the cemetery without our permission, and we need to know exactly the words you are going to use. They forced us to change the final sentence. In their memory and in their honor, and with regret for their condition of servitude, this engraving is dedicated. We could not regret their condition of servitude. So we learned here that it was going to take an effort for people in Brookline to engage with slavery, and it would only happen when it mattered to the town of Brookline. And so we then, next slide, we had to figure out how to reckon with slavery. And every time we reckoned with slavery, it was a piece of restorative justice. And we did it in a number of ways over years. And I will only talk about the most powerful ways that we did. So the question was, how do we get people to reckon with slavery? Next. Well, we put things up on our website. This is our homepage, or the upper part of our homepage. And one day, an African-American activist in town went to our website, and she noticed that the main school in town, the Devotion School, right smack in the middle of town with Devotion's house right on Harvard Street, that he was an enslaver. Next. And this was his probated property. And she went to the school and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And the school decided not to do anything. They called me up and they said, "What do we do?" I wasn't wise enough to suggest anything at that time. But Deborah Brown, no relation, said, "You need to change the name." And a groundswell of people across town said, "You need to change the name. The name cannot stay. We cannot honor an enslaver." And other people in the town went, the polite way to put it would be holy cow. They went shit. They did not want to change the name. And it was a historic name. That was a long time ago when he died. It doesn't matter today. And so we had this vicious, exciting debate here in town about to what extent does slavery then matter now? And it was a fierce debate. It was a wonderful debate. Well, no, it wasn't a wonderful debate until we won. And then it had been a wonderful debate. And so the next slide, please. The superintendent of schools, the man in the far back on the right, made a brilliant, audacious decision. From the school in third through eighth grade would be the deciders on the name. And they would take their choices to the school committee, who would then approve or not, and take the choices to the town meeting to vote. Two of the girls in the front were in the third grade when this started, in the third grade. And the group met. It took them a whole year. But the other thing the superintendent and the school committee did was also brilliant. They said everybody in town could submit a name, and the students would look through 125 names. And they did it not even by consensus, they did it by mutual agreement. They never had a disagreement within the committee. They just talked and talked until they were clear. It was an amazing time. The students didn't believe how much time they would spend. It was at least 1 hour every single week for a year. And they reduced the 125 names to 15. They took the standard criteria and then they added one other criterion. And that blew the whole thing up. They added restorative justice to a good person who's done good work, preferably lived in town, et cetera, et cetera. And then they said restorative justice. And of those 15 names, 14 of the 15 were either African American or indigenous. And people in town went crazy. People in town were bullshit because they hadn't heard of most of those people. Because we have not learned properly in town or across the country about the people of color who've been trailblazers for justice. Next slide. And so the students took 4 names out of those 15, and everybody was allowed to send in their comments about the 15 names. This committee on names said some pretty terrible things before they went with the names forward. And I won't bother to repeat those now. It was very similar to what the trustees of the cemetery had said. The students said our preference is for Florida Ruffin Ridley, who, as you can see here, was a national leader in the 1890s through the 1920s. She started in the when she was in her early 30s and never stopped. Her mother was what's her name? Ruffin, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin. And unfortunately, the media, including the New York Times, has decided that Ruffin did all of these things by herself, that she was the only publisher and editor of the first magazine for African American women called The Woman's Era, that she was the only founder of the National Conference of African American Women's Club, that she was the only anti-lynching leader here in Boston. And she was never a Harlem Renaissance writer. I mention that because Mount Auburn Cemetery has a lot about her. The Women's Trail in Boston was mistaken, and they've now fixed that. And it's been again and again and again that Florida Ruffin Ridley, because she had a famous mother, has been ignored as a famous, equally famous daughter. On to the next. They took that name to the town meeting. The head of the town meeting did some very nasty shenanigans to prevent this name from being chosen. It was chosen. And it is now the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. She did not pronounce it Florida. And next slide. Then we needed another selection committee because also they found on our website that the Heath family was an enslaving family and the Heath School name had to go. This was the selection committee for the Heath School. And they did a different decision on how to proceed. They looked at all of the names that submitted from the town and from within the school. This time it was only 35 names, and they chose 4. And this time it was the parents at the school, the students at the school from kindergarten through 8th grade, and then all of the adults working at the school, the cooks, the secretaries, the social workers, and the teachers, and everybody else. And everybody voted. And it was a ranked choice voting on one day. And they came up with a final name that they sent, a single name that they sent to town school committee and town meeting. Next. And they named it the Roland Hayes School. And so part of what we were doing in Brookline was bringing to light the names of people who should never be forgotten. Roland Hayes, in case you don't know, broke the color bar in 1923 with the Boston Symphony after they had refused to have him sing with them. He was a tenor in 1917. Marian Anderson said if there had not been Roland Hayes, there would not have been a Marian Anderson. So he was key in the early 20th century and had solo concerts at Carnegie Hall before the King of England and elsewhere and around the world. He was extraordinarily well known, and he lived in Brookline for 50 years. His daughter and granddaughter went through the Brookline schools, and his daughter and daughters were there at the renaming of the school ceremony, which was an incredibly joyous moment. So our committee, our Hidden Brookline, is about slavery and freedom because we want to join them together, because the struggle for equality, the struggle for justice has continued from the time of Dinah and her daughters right up to the present. Oh, there was another enslaved man who escaped. Now, next, please. My question to you, and particularly the folks in Lexington and Concord, is what history are we going to tell? Are we going to tell the history of Paul Revere and the Old North Church? Or are we going to tell a bigger history? A fuller, more accurate history? Next. In 1773, 2 major events happened. The only one that was publicized in 2023 was the Boston Tea Party. There was 0 mention of the enslaved people of Massachusetts petitioning for freedom, stating, we have no property, we have no wives, we have no children, we have no country. We pray for relief from bondage. Why do we only have the December event? We are missing the African Americans who were enslaved in Massachusetts. They were enslaved in every single one of the 13 colonies. This was not a revolution for freedom. This was a revolution for independence. What story are we going to tell? Next, please. Huge question. And this is a question that I ask of all of you when I finish with a slideshow. How are we going to respond to stories about the myths? Next. More than enslavers lived here. Next. Thomas Perkins was a human trafficker for 30 years, an opium smuggler, the biggest opium smuggler from the United States in China. And then the Institute, the Asylum for the Blind, came to him and said, we'd like you to make a large contribution to the school. We need it. This is in the 1830s. And we will change the school's name to your name. And so it became the Perkins School for the Blind. And until the Perkins School for the Blind saw our website about Thomas Perkins, they had described him as one of the most magnificent human beings of the 19th century. Next. His main slave trading place was in Haiti, which was the wealthiest colony and the deadliest colony. Next. They had 29 opium ships and they had 7 slave trading ships. Next. And very interestingly, without any shame, he gave these items to the Mass Historical Society. Next. And he is widely known today still simply as a merchant and a philanthropist, not as a slave trader and a drug lord. Next. That's the end. And so my question to you is, what kind of a story are we going to tell next year and the year following? And I'm eager for your questions and your comments. And I can also tell you, if you'd like to, about what happened when Byron Rushing and I met with one of the executives of the Perkins School for the Blind a year ago.
If you care to, that would be.
Well, it took us 7 months to meet with them because they needed to hear us say again and again and again that we had no ask, that we were there simply to have a dialogue. It turned out we didn't have a dialogue. They talked for the full hour. And they began their talking by saying, the executive, by saying, we have no money to spend on this. We didn't ask for any money to be spent on that. And they talked and they talked and they talked. What my thought is, because we had no ask at that time, is they don't have to spend additional money. They can just put money towards African Americans, towards people in the Caribbean, and towards the Chinese who need services. They could shift some of their priorities. But they don't want to hear from us. And they will probably get a hold of this talk, because they got a hold of a talk I gave in Maine, where the Perkins were not the primary purpose of the talk.
Thank you. Well, Barbara, a wealth of information, hidden Brookline. And like most of us, and certainly myself, up until, I was an adult, I always viewed slavery again as being something that was part of the South cotton fields of Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. So it is always a learning point in no matter where we are in life to understand more about slavery in the Northeast. So we do have a number of questions. I want to thank you, first of all, Friendly, for sharing this with us. And as we, move forward along our journey here of providing bits and pieces of American history, that is not always talked about. Now we have a number of statements in the chat. And Naomi, where do we start at?
Yeah, so Paula asked a question in the chat, and then I think we can move to Robert Bellinger, who has his hand raised.
Okay.
So Paula Paris asks, what was the church in which the coroner's marriage was recorded?
It's a church that continues to exist. The building is a 19th century building. It's called First Parish Brookline. It is now a Unitarian church. At the time, it was a Puritan church. And you could not have a town until you had a church, a pub, and a school.
Interesting. All right. Thank you.
And I think Robert Bellinger has a question.
I have, I guess, three comments, but first, let me applaud you, Barbara, on your work, your continued work, and your consistency in holding Brookline's feet to the fire. It's very important. My first comment is what I put in the chat about the 2111 date you put in. To be more specific, because I've used these numbers in my own talks, Black people were enslaved for 246 years in this land. It was 2022 when America became free for as long as it had slavery. 2111 is the date that Black people will have been free for as long as they were enslaved. And that specificity is very important, I think. That it's not just the nation, it's the number of years before Black people will have been freed for as long as they were enslaved in this country. My second point in question, the church in Brookline was congregational, yes?
At one point, yes.
Yes.
But at the time, it was a Puritan church.
Yeah, which was.
I like to use the word Puritan because that carries with it a certain rigidity and a very strong hierarchy.
Yeah, well, that's basically who the Puritans were. And the reason I raise that is because you mentioned Dinah and her daughters, Venus and Violet, being baptized. I know here in Lexington, the church pretty much required baptism of those who were enslaved. And so in the church records, you find many of the people who were enslaved here were baptized, and also free Blacks were baptized, because that meant you were, required to be in the church, to come to the community, et cetera, not that it changed your status at all. And the last comment I'll make is to encourage everyone here to make a point of, and perhaps we can figure out a way to maybe have some kind of clearinghouse, but for people to make a point of getting out to the various communities in Greater Boston and beyond to find out what is being done. Because there's a lot being done, just like many people don't know what's happening in Brookline if they haven't heard of your work or talked to you. And I raise that because you threw a little bit of shade towards my town of Lexington by
I
asking
know
what
better. I was
doing.
waiting for your reply.
And one of the things that I'll just say a couple of things. One is, if anyone here has not visited the Women's Monument, which opened in May, you should. There are about 23 women who are recognized in that monument, and they tell different stories. It's right on the Visitors Center lawn, caddy corner across from the Battle Green. And for instance, it tells the story of the women's tea burning party on December 13th, 3 days before the Boston Tea Party. It tells the story of Margaret Tulip, who had a freedom suit in 1768. And it tells the story of other women, Black and other, between the 18th and 21st century. And right now in Lexington, there is a conversation and battle going on between those who want to increase the story, broaden the number of voices being recognized during this celebration, and those who are the old guard, just like you're facing in Brookline. And the same is happening in Concord. I'm working there as well. So there are a lot of people who are pushing to expand the narrative, to expand the number of voices and stories that are told. and move beyond just April 19th, but also to have more voices of those who were in April 19th. And one of the people I've written about is Pompey Blackman, and I won't say any more about him, but if you're interested, you can contact me. But I've been, and lastly, what I'll say is the National Park Service right now, I'm working with them on a big project looking at the Black Revolutionary War veterans and their communities in New England, focusing on Massachusetts and communities connected to national parks. But it's also spreading a little further than that. So there's quite a bit of work being done. And it would be great to have an opportunity to bring together all of the different people doing stuff so we could all find out the breadth of stuff that is taking place, because there's, I think, a lot happening right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bellinger. That would be an interesting project. Maybe we could talk about bringing,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I'd like to pipe in to follow up on what Robert just said. I'm Debbie Weiss. I'm a playwright. I'm actually working on a project for Lexington in about April 19. And I'm trying to make it very diverse and realizing that additional voices could be added. Robert, I'll put my information in the chat. I'd love to get connected with you and hear the story and see if there's a way to either overlap it with what I'm currently doing or have it be something, a tangential project that could be put on, because they are celebrating, of course, the 250th anniversary of April 19 and all of those events in this spring, upcoming spring. So
Yes.
Naomi, if I could also interject, what might be helpful is if we could set up a system so that if you have news of African Americans being included, I don't mean as speakers or as cultural workers, but included in the history of that period of the 250th, I'd like to know, it would be very helpful in Brookline to know that their African Americans are being included in the history from 1775 and 1776. It will make it easier for us to get stuff done in Brookline if we know Lexington is doing it, if we know the Concord is doing it, if we know that Cambridge is doing it, and so forth.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and I wonder if we could even have a special Zoom at least with folks engaging in 250th work and just have a discussion so we kind of know where everybody's at with that at the very least. Definitely something for thought.
That's a fantastic idea, Naomi. Should we, if we're involved, get connected to you, Naomi, send a little note about what we're doing, and then you can get us all kind of together on another joint email and then find a time to have a Zoom conversation or something? That would be really tremendous. I've just actually written a draft of a project, and what I did initially to have diversity is normally the story would be told just by men, but I added women, but we could try to extend it. So in the project, there, instead of having like a coterie of men, it's like half of the voices that we're hearing are female, and people from different anyway. But I'd love to tell you more about that and then see how I could layer on additional voices. So I will send a note to you, Naomi, about that. Does that sound like a good approach?
That sounds good. So I've dropped my email in the chat. Maybe I'll get an Excel sheet going of everybody's information, but yeah, definitely stay tuned with what we can put together regarding that. It's fantastic.
Great idea.
I
I
think
just say, add that official plans for every town have already starting, so we need to do this soon. April is not very far away.
so
As
email me.
Lexington well knows.
We'll follow up with that and just provide Naomi with the information, your contact information, and we'll get back to you.
Even if people could just say, how the names of enslaved people from your town who fought at the Battle of Lexington, who fought at the Battle of Concord. We could compiling that would be terrific. And maybe Lexington and Concord already know that.
I'll just mention that I have seen. I'm originally from Lexington, but not currently living there. But I'm connected to LHS and have been working with them on a variety of things. But I have seen that in the windows downtown Lexington have told the stories of people of color who were involved in the history. So, and actually, others who live in Lexington can comment further.
Very good.
I'll just say that a few years ago, I did a project with the Lexington Historical Society on the history of Black residents of Lexington from 1690 to 1800 and bleeding into the 1800s a bit. And right now we're looking at making that more readily available. Also, right now there is another project, the Lexington Lyceum Advocates, that are working to renovate the stone building, which was a 19th century Lyceum Hall, and which was one of the few places in town that allowed abolitionist speakers. It's right next to the fallen church, which was a fairly radical church. And so they're also looking at abolition and have found that while he did not speak, as far as we know, in Lexington, Frederick Douglass did attend a couple of meetings in Lexington, as well as other well-known African-American abolitionists. And so, yeah, so there's some interesting stuff going on.
That is, thank you very much, Dr. Bellinger. Thank you for that. Yes, this is a very important year, historically speaking, and gives us an opportunity to come together and work on additional projects. So we thank you for those suggestions.
There's another issue going on, and that is the Freedom Trail itself. Why do we call it the Freedom Trail? Since the majority of the sites on the Freedom Trail include enslaved people. 4 million people go on the Freedom Trail each year.
Mm.
And it's so good that Faneuil Hall has finally owned up to its history.
Well, again, questions to be answered and to be pursued. Barbara, we thank you very, very much for your presentation today. And it gave us, it was really, thank you. Very enlightening. And as always, full of provocative points that we can certainly think about. So again, thank you very much. I must ask that if anyone has any information or projects that you think would be of interest to our platform, please share them. Share them with, Naomi's information is there, and Naomi is, coordinates everything very effectively for us. And so please do, put your name in there and we'll, get back to you and see what we can, put together a presentation. There are so many people here that I certainly want to, reach out to, and, Paula, it's good. Sarah, it's good to see you. Dan, everyone. Before we conclude our meeting for the 2024 year, again, it's, hard to believe we'll be going into our fourth year. To the First Church of Cambridge, who, for their very generous donation that they recently provided to the Slave Legacy History Coalition, will help us to continue our work. And we want to thank, the congregation, the parishioners, and certainly in the background, the former senior minister of First Church, I'm sure, who is very humbly sits there on our screen without saying much, but Thank you very much, Dan and Paula, and for the first Church of Cambridge for their very generous donation, and it'll help us continue to provide internships and also maintain our full-time position coordinator and other, and to give us an opportunity to venture out into other areas that we'd like to develop.
Dennis, can I just share briefly?
Certainly.
That came out of a reparations fund. And so I think people at First Church are not considering it a donation,
Okay.
but repayment of a debt that is owed, a small token of that. But I think it's important just to mention the basis on which that contribution was made, not as a gift, but as just a start at one congregation doing some work at relinquishing resources and what's going to happen with those, the control over what happens to those resources. And it seemed that the Slave Legacy History Coalition, given First Church's connection to your ancestor, Cuba Vassal, who is on our membership records, was a good relational connection for our experiments in doing reparative work and truth telling. So just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Just a little more about the process. It's definitely not a philanthropic model. As Dan mentioned, relinquishment and discernment, and so yeah, it's not a charitable contribution by any stretch of the imagination. It is a very different model, and how it is used is entirely up to the coalition. So
We thank you, and
don't have to report on it.
Yeah, well, we thank you. We thank you. We thank you. We thank the First Church for the support. And believe me, we are continuing our work and to continue having, employees and to bring, a program that provides a broader knowledge of enslavement in the American history journey is something that we will continue to do. So thank you very, very, very much, and we appreciate it. As we move into 2025, our fourth full year, I just wanted to, Naomi did mention on January 8th, we'll have Sarah Bleish, who will update us on the Harvard Legacy of Slavery Initiative. And on February 12th, we have Ken Reeves, the founding member of the Cambridge African American Heritage Trail, who will give us an update. And I see Mayor Reeves, former Mayor Reeves of Cambridge, here with us right here. And on March 12th, we will have Seth Rockman, Brown University, and who is the author of Plantation Goods, a material history of American slavery. It should be very, very, very interesting. In April 9th, we have Scarlett Honey, who is the Worcester Art Museum and telling the whole history. So I know Scarlett will have a very interesting presentation. And May 14th, we have Dr. Etta Fields Black, author of Combahee, Harriet Tubman, the Combahee River Raid, and the Black Freedom Revolution, during the. Interestingly, we were in Tennessee, I believe it was. My wife and I, we went and I had just been introduced to Dr. Eddie Fields Black, and as we were going through the exhibition, who should be on the monitor and the prompt, talking about enslavement history as it took place in actually, I'm sorry, I stand amended. We were in Charleston, South Carolina, at the Charleston, South Carolina Museum. So she was participating in the in the program virtually on the presentation. So that was very exciting. And then And June 11th, we will have Gloria Whiting, author of Belonging and an Intimate History of Slavery. Gloria has been working on this book, and she's at the University of Wisconsin, I believe. And Dr. Eddie is at the Carnegie Mellon, affiliated with Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Dr. Whiting is affiliated with the University of Wisconsin, and she will be, speaking on her book, The Intimate History of Slavery. And then as we move into the fall, as you know, we take off June and July and August. We are going to begin our fall series with First Church of Cambridge, and Dan Smith, former senior minister, will give a presentation on the First Church of Cambridge and its historical involvement in the enslavement and its position in Cambridge now. So we also have October and November lined up, and I do not have the names of the potential speakers at the moment in December, but we're moving into the 2025 year, and we look forward to you joining with us. We thank all of you. Sarah, hello. Haven't seen you in a minute. And Cushion, and certainly Julia, Mike, so many of you who have been strong supporters. And we thank you very, very much. We thank you for your support, and we look forward to continuing providing meaningful information on the historical journey that has taken place in America. And with that, I'd like to wish all of you a happy holiday season, and with your family, yourselves, stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you in the 2025 new year. So thank you again, and God bless everyone. Take care.